Do. Hey, hon, I'm gonna go out to the garage, get some work done. Okay, babe, that sounds good. Oh, shucks. My boot's untied. Let me tie that. No! No! God, why? No! Oh, you poor thing. I'm so sorry. What will I ever do without you? Ah, just kidding. This thing's gonna have a piece of junk. We'll make a new one. So here is the finished bench. It measures 25 inches wide, 12 inches deep, and 17 inches high. There's a 10-inch gap down here and a little over a 5-inch gap up here. Shoes will be stored in this area, and then my taller boots and things like that will be down here. It has box joints in the corners, and it has a shallow, I guess I'd call it a shallow tenon and mortise or shallow tongue groove, and this mid shelf to hold that in the sides. And it's plenty strong for me to put my foot on if I want to tie my shoe up there, or if I actually even want to sit on it. Plenty strong, tested it out a couple times. It was finished in white milk paint, and then 3 coats of water-based poly. The color was a little bit of a debate on this one. After much back and forth and some voting, decided to go with white. That voting consisted of my wife and I and our 2 dogs. My wife gets 2 votes, I get 1 vote, and the dogs both abstain because they don't want to pick favorites. So go figure. Ended up white. So yeah, looking forward to get this in the laundry room. It's been notched for the baseboard so it fits nice and tight against the wall so it won't obstruct the walking path as much. And as always, I appreciate you watching. Have a good one. Okay, so I skip a lot of the milling process here, but let me explain real quick what has happened thus far. All the lumber started out as an 8/4 inch piece of ash. The ash was then cut to rough length for the individual components. I then did some light milling. I re-sawn that 8/4 inch down in half to 2 4/4 pieces. I then milled it again, edge glued it together to form some book match panels. These panels are almost 12 inches wide right now. I have 2 long panels for the top and the shelf, and then 2 shorter panels for the sides. After these panels did come out of the clamps, I scraped off all the hardened glue, and then I passed it through my drum sander at 80 grit and 180 grit to get these get the seams all nice and aligned, as well as get some initial prep sanding done. Next up, I'm going to cut these to length. Not every piece, so this will be the middle, the shelf that's in the middle. I'm just going to cut this square for right now and not cut to its final length. So here we go. So you can see me using a large square here to make sure my cuts are perpendicular. The first time I cut these, I forgot that the last cuts I made were actually not 90 degrees, and so I had to recut them and just triple checking that they're square. So to cut the box joints, I'm using Incra's iBox joint jig, and here I am reacquainting myself with the instructions and setup. After a handful of test pieces, I move on to the real thing. Okay, so I've got the box joints cut in the bench piece here. My process, I kind of set up the jig, had to get out the instruction manual because I don't do this very often. And I used some MDF, some scrap MDF to make a bunch of test cut pieces to make sure the jig was dialed in. My test cut pieces fit excellent. Unfortunately, when I went to do the box joints on one joint here and try to test fit, no-go. So I don't know if there's just a little bit of cumulative error that I couldn't detect in just 5 joints that showed up when I got to, whatever this is, 13 or 15 joints up here. So I had to cut off those fingers and try it again. So what I did is I reset up the box joint jig, redid it all, made some new test pieces, made sure it was as perfect as I could on these short pieces. And then I went and cut the real thing again. The fit was much better, still a little off. I can tell there's still a little bit of cumulative error building up as I go across the width. Lesson learned for me next time, make my test piece as wide as my finished piece so I can get the full understanding of the relative error and make sure everything is exactly perfect before I cut these. But it's together. Next up, I will be cutting the dado in the 2 side legs where the little shelf will go, and so that will add a spot for some shoes as well as add a little more rigidity to this bench. So what I have set up is a 3/8 inch router bit. I then have my fence set to the desired height of my shelf from the top, and luckily I have just enough distance for my fence to slide far enough back to set that up, else I would have had to use like a handheld router. I have a piece of masking tape here that has 4 marks on it. There's 2 in the center that are 3/8 inches apart that mark the extents of the router bit. When I already cut this one, when I cut my dado or my mortise, I want to stop a 1/2 inch shy of the front. So that means that I put a mark a 1/2 inch from each of my initial marks, meaning that's where the board should stop, so I'm a 1/2 inch away from the front. So how this works, turn on the router bit, this piece would drop down onto the router, set down onto the router bit, and then push all the way through and continue my cut all the way out the back. For the other piece, it's the other way around. We actually start routing from the back, go all the way through till we get to our mark, and then lift it off. So I've got both those done. Got a 3/8 inch, like I said, call that a dado, call it a mortise. I don't know. It's a groove in the wood going across the grain. Anywho, all right. So next up is going to be cutting the shelf to its final length. 2 important dimensions here. The joinery on the shelf is going to be just like a really shallow tenon, if you make that out in there. And so the distance between the shoulder to the very end of the tenon or tongue is going to correspond with the grooves, or the dados that were just cut into the legs. Then the distance from shoulder to shoulder has to match the top piece. So when the finger joints come together and this tenon and mortise come together, everything's nice and tight, all the surfaces line up. So the overall length of the shelf is going to be the distance from our finger joints plus then the distance or the depth of our tenons. So to cut that next on the miter saw, that is 24 7/16 plus 1/32 of an inch. Before I shut the camera off, after that I'll be cutting the joint or the tenon on probably the router.
I did use my router table to cut the tenon with a large surfacing bit, just sneaking up and removing material to get a nice tight fit.
Alright, so I've done a fair bit of work here. I have sanded all 4 of these panels down. I have scribed where the baseboard and the shoe molding is on the wall that it's going to go against, so I've scribed around that. My method for doing that was I actually made a small template here that I scribed first, made sure it fit up nice, and then I brought to the piece and just traced the line and then cut to my line. After I got everything sanded down, I wet it all, I'll let the grain raise, I sanded it all down again, used my drum sander for most of it, thing's fantastic, and then of course I had to do the edges by hand though. Alright, since my last project turned out really nice with the milk paint, I'm going to try it again on this one. This is the Snow White milk paint by Journal Finishes. And as you can see, I've masked off some of the joinery, so the box joints are masked off, as well as the small tenons on the end of the mid shelf, and then the box joints over here as well. I usually don't have to mask off grooves because when I roll it, it just kind of goes over top of it. It doesn't seep in. So yeah, we're gonna get painting. I've gotten 3 coats of the milk paint on each of these pieces, on the internals. I then also gave them 2 coats of polyurethane, just because I don't think I'll be able to get good access once it's glued up. Unfortunately, one of the issues I did run into when applying finish to one side, as you can imagine, moisture absorbs in the other, caused a little bit of cupping and warpage. So this one end piece has kind of got a little bit of a bow in it here, and it's making my joint for my shelf not look real good. So I'm probably gonna have to, kind of clamp it pretty hard to get it to close back up. And then once I get finished to the outside, hopefully it will stabilize and I don't have to worry about it. But yeah, the next step here is to do the glue up. I'm gonna get some glue out and some clamps, and we'll get this thing together. The little bench shelf just came out of the clamps this morning. It's looking pretty good actually. I have a couple of small gaps next to a couple of the fingers here. Not too bad. Coming up next here on this bench is going to be to flush up the box joints, as well as flush up the front and rear faces with each other. There's a little bit of an edge here up by the fingers, and a little edge here by where the shelf meets the side. So I'm going to flush those up, do some more sanding, and then it's time to apply paint to the external surfaces. So I've gotten 3 coats of paint on the exterior surfaces of the bench, as well as the edges. I rolled on all 3 coats, as you saw, with a light sand in between coats, and then after the 3rd and final coat, I still gave it a really light sand with 320 grit sandpaper, just to knock off any nibs any dust or nibs that fell on that while drying. Man, words are hard. So next up here, I've got my little turntable set up for spraying. I've got my sprayer set up and ready to go. I've got the polyurethane out. So I'm going to start spraying coats of poly. I'll be spraying 3 coats in total over the next couple of days here as I get free time around my work schedule. So yeah, gonna get spraying. Yippity-doo. one thing I forgot to mention. When I did the internals of the bench, I used a thicker nap roller. I might have mentioned that before. And that put the paint on really thick, and frankly it obscured a lot of the wood grain, and that wasn't the look I was going for. So for these external surfaces, I stuck with my finer nap. It's like a purple velour roller, and that gave me adequate paint coverage, but did not obscure the grain. I could still see it through the paint. So that's what I was looking for. And now I'm going to spray.
I like this piece. It it looks very simple, especially with the paint on it. It obscures a lot of maybe the complexity that gives this bench its strength and durability.
Here's the finished product. I know it's a little hard to see, but as you can tell, plenty strong. Do my boots, do whatever else. Shoe storage, boot storage, classy. So I just pulled all the glue off this silicone brush. I like a honeycomb. Cool. I don't know. Maybe I should shut the camera off because I don't know what I'm doing. What are we calling this thing? Stool? Shelf? I don't know. It's a... That still kind of sucked, didn't it? Shit. Rambling. Rough sawn. Rough sawn. Try it again. I'm just going to start over. Looking terrible. Terrible.